Computer. Okay. And then I'm going to do the Facebook Live. And that's going to take just a second. All right, awesome. We are live. Thank you again so much for joining me again today on the Body and Soul Wisdom podcast. Some of you may remember I shared, I think it was maybe back in April, and when I was a guest on the Modern Day Intuitive podcast with Sarah Noble. So it is my honor and my pleasure to welcome her to the show today from Bend, Oregon. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for joining.
Hey, Jen, thanks. It's good to be here.
Super fun to be here together. We're excited to talk all things intuition, living your soul purpose, and just anything else that comes up today. So can you start by just sharing with the audience and myself a little bit about you and how you got into this type of work?
Yeah, so gosh, it's been a lifelong endeavor for me in little pockets, and just this journey of really deepening into my own spiritual path and deepening that relationship with my intuition. I've always wanted to know sort of what is God or who is God since I was a little kid. And I think that was really the main motivator that kept me really curious about the things that we can't see, we can't explain, that we just know, that we just feel. And it really led me on a wild journey. And then about 10 years ago, after I'd had my kids, I went through a really big period of depression and anxiety and just a dark night of the soul, essentially. And it became evident that the career path I was on at the time did not match what my soul had been longing for. And I was really pushed up against that choice of, do I stay because I need the money and I've got all these bills and a new family? Or do I just say, I'm really going to just jump off that cliff and trust that what my heart is asking me for is the place that I have to go? And I did. I resigned. I just let it all kind of go. And it really took me on this big journey into who am I? Really, who am I? And I had already been on a personal growth journey for over 10 years. It wasn't like new to me. And I thought I had it all together. And then here I was thrown into this sort of situation that was my life. I created it. It was my kids, my job, my husband, everything. And yet it just all got turned around in a way that I did not foresee. And it was in climbing out of that experience slowly, but intentionally, and really allowing myself to be led as opposed to me forcing and pushing for what is it? It was a journey into allowing myself to be guided to what it was. And that was my heart that was leading me. And then what I later learned more, this connection with my guides and the spiritual essence that is our world. And that is what led me here today into all of this amazingness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. When you first started to share your story about when you were younger and had this curiosity around God, and I myself was raised Catholic, and I often find that, there's always this space of curiosity, we'll just say, between intuition, God, spirituality, religion. And we're not going to dive too deep in that on this podcast, but I did do an episode. I was trying to be funny. It was called Are You There, God? It's Me, Your Intuition. And really just this deeper understanding of what I learned to, and what I knew as a child and was taught is as the Holy Spirit, that my intuition was acting in that energy or that frequency of the voice of the Holy Spirit, and that in that clairaudient way. And so I think I just want to, put that, my perception of that, to what it is for somebody maybe who's listening, who's just questioning, like, well, what is the difference? And what I heard you say also, and that I love, and I want to continue the conversation on, is this awakening in this moment to who am I, where am I going, what am I doing, and leaning into that trust and starting to hear, or I don't know if it was hearing for you. I know there's several different types of intuition, and we'll dive into that. And sort of just having this understanding, leaning into this intuition through trust, because trust is the gateway to our intuition, and really allows us to open up and to hear or see or feel or know. Sometimes there's even types of intuition through smell and taste. So can you tell us a little bit about what intuition is, and what it is and how it shows up for us?
Sure. Yeah. And for me, it's knowing. Knowing has been my strongest. I've developed the other ones. And yet, in the beginning, when I was first exploring this expansion of capacity, is the way I kind of experience it, is my capacity to connect in with what our typical senses don't connect with, they don't pick up on. So for me, it was knowing, and it was tricky because my experience of knowing was confusing. Is it me? Is it my mind? It sounds like me. It feels like I'm thinking it, but I'm not. I just know this thing. And it was learning to trust that when something dropped in that I didn't know why I knew it, I just needed to start saying it or following the thread of it. And it was in that trusting that it built the capacity to connect with it more deeply and to then really trust it. And I love that you bring in trust, because that is one of the things that I teach and talk about, is our ability to trust our intuition is directly related to the level of trust we have for ourselves. I believe that they're very intertwined. And so a big part of our intuitive journey is really trusting ourselves first.
Yeah, it's so true. And so for those who might be new to the conversation around intuition, even though there are episodes where I've talked on it before, knowing is called claircognizance. And there's also clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience. Those would be probably the main four. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those?
Yeah. So claircognizance or clairknowing is our ability to download essentially information where, for me, it feels like it just lands in my brain and as if it's always been there, but it wasn't, because there's no way I should really know this about you or a situation or the path forward, but I do. And it's just there as if it's part of me. Clear audience or clear hearing, often it's related to our ears. It's related to being able to hear. And this is like where you hear in people talk about hearing music or hearing a conversation, and then they're like, but there's nobody there. Do you hear that? And nobody else can hear it, because it's our ability to hear things at different frequencies. And I like to talk about that like a dog whistle. We don't hear it, but the sound is there. It's actually happening. The dog can hear it. And I believe that our audience is like that, where we have that ability within our senses to hear at different frequencies. And then clairsentience or clear feeling is about our ability to feel our environment and feel what someone else is feeling. A little bit like empathy, or being empathic. I think there is a nuanced difference, though, because being an empath, we're able to feel what others are feeling, but my sense is that we don't actually elicit information from feeling what they're feeling. We just understand what they're going through, or we're taking it on. Whereas if you're actually using that clairsentience feeling, the sensitivity of that to read information, you might feel nauseous and then a memory comes forward with it. So it's specifically, there's information caught or crystallized into the feeling that you're experiencing. So for me, there is that nuanced difference in there. And that the way that we absorb it or feel it in our body brings forward the ability to understand more through that sense of feeling inside our bodies. And then clairvoyance or clear seeing is where we can see things. And this can range really from, some people can see things like a movie playing in their head, or they can see other entities in the room, or see the future being played out like a scene, all the way to where my clear seeing is a little more like a sensing. Like I see a wisp of an image and I almost know that I'm seeing something. And so it can go anywhere in that range. I've found that depending on where we are, I think in our evolution of that gift is how it presents itself to us and how vibrant it can be. So those are I did touch on the four main ones.
Four main ones.
Yeah.
As you were speaking, this vision came into my mind that essentially it's almost like I saw this image of like a sort of a radio tower receiving information. And then I was thinking, there's like AM and FM, right? Or in my experience, I have an experience working on ships. There were like these different frequencies that different information would come through in different frequencies. So this image I had is like, we're like a radio tower. And then depending on how that information comes in, it lights up one of the chakras. And it's either, the clairvoyance in our third eye, the clairaudience here, which I feel is related to the throat chakra actually. And then the clear sentience, I know I feel in my sacral, and the claircognizance feels very solar to me. That's just kind of the image that I got as you were speaking. And you touched on something, you talked about how you developed other senses. And I want to dive in a little bit around that conversation. Many people have one or all of these and don't know it. So my intention for this is to give people permission and awareness to know that this is normal. This is not just spiritual, it's also science, Heart Math Institute. There's, all kinds of information out there that you can dive into and tap into if you are knowingly already experiencing things. I mean, in my life, it happens so much. It's just normal for me. I'll literally be thinking about somebody and they'll send me a text message, or I'll hear a song and then the song will come on the radio. It just like happens probably 10 times a day. And I know in my personal experience, I feel like clear cognizance might be the hardest one to identify, because it's like you're just right and you don't know why you're right, to the point where you could even have the answer to a math problem and not even solve it. Like I watched my daughter do that. Like, how did you know that? And she's like, I just know. I'm like, you have to solve the problem. But in my own personal experience, for me, it was clairsentient, was very, and I had to do, you talked about empathy. I had to do a lot of inner work around the unhealthy part of empathy before I could really tap into the gift of clairsentience. And I did a podcast on that, the wounded badge of empathy, for anybody who knows that they take on too much. This is really kind of common for, well, I mean, I think women as caretakers, but especially healers, or anybody who identifies as that, or service providers. Sometimes we just take on too much. And once I really did the inner work around understanding the subconscious unhealthy need to be empathic and to take on other people's to avoid my own thing, or to want to be seen deeper because I could see people deeply. When I did that work and realized I was unhealthy, empathic, because I was getting sick, physically sick, when I was working with people, then I was able to realize that this is clairsentient and healthy. And then I was able to develop sort it's not that I developed, it was actually always there, but I was able to attune in a more healthy way the clairaudience and the clairvoyance. And so I'm just curious about your experience and maybe some helpful tips to anybody who's listening who might want to lean into the trust of developing or just attuning to the natural intuition that's already there and learning to trust it. What have you noticed along your journey in evolving that, and what are some helpful tips?
Sure. First, I wanted to speak to that. My understanding is everybody is born with these gifts, and we're born with all of them. We have this ability inside us. One of them is typically our strongest. Maybe we developed it in another life. Maybe it's, part of our soul mission. However, one of them can be the portal, is the way I kind of see it. If we're, wanting, so this is my experience. I was working with a woman that I loved. A lot of her teaching was about seeing. And I was getting very frustrated because I couldn't see. So I would do all these meditations, I do all these works with my chakras, and just blackness or red was all that I could see. And I proceeded down that path for a good year and thinking that it was so hard. What's wrong with me? I can't do this. And then I had this idea to practice on my mom, like instead of just myself, because what I really wanted to do was read for other people. I was really intrigued by that idea of read what I do on my podcast. And so I sat with my mom and I said, can I just see what happens? Because nothing's happening for me. And I all of a sudden I got information. And what I realized at that point, as I was receiving, I could see, I saw all these sunflowers. But what I could see with the way the information was coming in was that my gift was knowing. I just knew things about her. And when I said them, she confirmed them. So all of a sudden, I opened up this portal within myself, but it came through the knowing channel. My seeing channel didn't get activated until later, when I understood the difference and I understood how my personal development, like what was my strongest gift. So I feel passionate about helping people understand which is theirs, like with you, the clairsentience. So being able to develop that first, I think gives us an easier pathway, because the level of trust, we can build it faster instead of, and some people might have, I know some people that a lot of them are activated, but I think the majority of people, it is finding that nuance of which one is your gift that you want to then develop. And for me, it's practices of that are geared towards your specific gift. And as you begin to strengthen that, my experience was the other ones were easier to work with because I had this sort of foundation that helped me then launch into the other ones. It gave me more ability to trust myself. I've actually, because I'm so passionate about this piece, I have developed a quiz that helps you figure out which is your primary intuitive power, is what I call it. And I also have a little mini program that helps you develop those gifts, because I feel that for my journey, it was taking the time to really sit and practice. Like that was how mine got stronger, was practice, like in anything.
That was the question I was going to ask you, and you just, of course, took the words out of my mouth. That's probably how this conversation is going to go today. I'm realizing that I'm like, we're just in that sync right now, but the importance of trust and practice. It's like anything in life, really, just practicing meditation you become the meditation. When you practice eating well, you become health. It's like you begin to embody it. And so intuition, practicing trusting yourself, and practicing it's like a muscle, like learning to work that muscle. You're working the muscle of trust too, the more you learn to practice it. And as you were speaking, I just realized that, what happened for me is there's choice in it too. There is choice. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because what happened for me is I actually, when I decided to open up and trust, I was a little overwhelmed at the information that I was receiving. And I made choices to not be available for certain things personally. That doesn't mean that I don't trust, but there is, for me, I believe there is it one other muscle that we get to strengthen is a healthy boundary, and that is energetic. Like I talked earlier about empathy turning into clairsentience. Like I had to really excavate. I know that this is not, what's happening for me is not meant to make for me to suffer. I am, the way that I'm showing up in this is creating the perception that I'm suffering and taking on, and I would literally feel physical things that other people were feeling. And my second health crisis in 2014 was an energetic health crisis, which was really the opening into all of this for me. And what I learned is that I learned to put into practice this knowing and this feeling. And it's almost like I learned to transmute it into a vision. So I chose, the practice allowed me to, you can say, open up that channel. And it opened up that channel for vision, or it opened up the trust that if I didn't want to feel the experience, or I should say I would feel it, but it would quickly turn into like a vision then. And that came through practice. And so and I also want to share that in my personal experience, as you're doing this and developing your intuition, that you do get choice in what you want to be available for. So, and I just want to share that because there were times where I felt, and somebody listening might feel, that empathy is overwhelming, if that's where you start, empathy or anything that you see. And so has this been your experience, that you get to create healthy choices and discernment around this and how you want to work with it?
Yeah, you're reminding me, like in the beginning when I was practicing more and more, I was a little bit afraid of what might happen. Like this was a new territory for me. There's a lot of energy out there that I don't necessarily want to be available for. So it was having clear energetic boundaries as I practiced. And also, as you were talking, it's this idea of, if we have a lot of our own personal trauma and our own stuff that we haven't been willing to look at, I personally see that as an interference in a way. It's harder to know what is mine
Mm.
and versus what is intuitive if I'm not even really clear on what's mine to start with. And if I don't have any boundaries with anybody, and I'm a people pleaser and I'm constantly giving and not receiving, and I'm an overachiever and an overdoer and all these things, it's going to get a little muddy, because being on the intuitive journey asks that you look at yourself. I don't believe that you can have a congruent relationship with your intuition if you don't have a congruent relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
I believe that it's a process that we go through. And the more we know ourselves, then the more we can have this relationship with our intuitive abilities. But they are connected for me.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And in that, I guess what's coming through for me, and I'm thinking of, listeners have heard me talk about intuition over the last 4.5 years, and some of them may be listening to this conversation for the first time. But I do feel like it is important also to this is where you trust yourself when you step into the space of allowing yourself to be guided intuitively. Also, you really want to, as a practitioner or a person that holds that space, 100% your personal work is non-negotiable, like non-negotiable, because it will get messy and your stuff will come through if you're not aligned. And the way that I see it as a person who sees energy is there's these inner energy fields, there's these like little black holes, and it's like almost like in the physical body there's leaky gut. It's like the integrity of the field is like there's like a gap, and in those gaps that's where attachments can come in. And your attachment might be, I mean, if it's really severe, if you're a people pleaser, a severe attachment might be like a narcissist, because that would be a relationship that would be kind of codependent in an unhealthy way. Or it could be something about mom comes up, or something about dad, and then it sort of infiltrates the energy field so that we can look at it or work on it. That's how I visually see things. So it is super important, as whether you're learning your own intuitive skills and developing them, or holding that space for other people, or choosing someone to hold that space for you, that integrity, that's the integrity piece of the energy field. Integrity in all the sense, and alignment, which is where I want to go with this conversation, is really important in order for that to be a healthy co-creation with truth, which is what intuition leads to, is truth. That doesn't necessarily mean that our perception of what we receive is 100% always correct, however, but that's where the trust comes in, right? So I want to talk a little bit about two things today for sure. One is intuition versus ego, and the other is really just where our intuition fits as far as living in our soul alignment. So can we talk first a little bit about intuition versus ego? Like, how do we know where we are in that? What's the difference? How does it show up differently?
First, I feel it important to define ego in this conversation.
Yes.
So for the purpose of what we're talking about, to me, ego is our conditioning. It's the way that the stories, the beliefs that we hold that keep us doing what we're doing. They sort of define us, right? I might behave a certain way, but the reason that I'm behaving that way is based on a belief or a story that I hold. I'm not just showing up this way. Something is creating this identity that I'm attached to. So for me, that's more sort of how I experience the ego. And then underneath is the truth of me. It's me, it's my soul, it's my essence, it's my dharma, it's my godliness, or, sort of spiritualness that is underneath all the stories and conditioning. So my journey has been dismantling the ego. And what that has looked like for me has been lots of removing the conditioning, looking at everything I believe. Everything is a belief, everything is a story. And being able to see that and depersonalizing a lot of it. So it's not me. That's the ego, right? Thinking that the money story that I hold or the money situation I'm in is me, it's mine, or the pain from my past is mine. I believe that that is how we get caught in the ego. Really, those are just stories, and we're allowing those stories to define us. So the image I'm getting is like the cracking open, like underneath is the gold and it's just cracking and shining through as the ego starts to be dismantled, to fall away, to not mean the same thing anymore. When I recognize that life is just happening, I'm the one that's making the meaning of everything that I see throughout my entire day. So when I live more in alignment with my intuition, everything I look at, I have more ability to remain neutral in what I'm looking at. I'm not triggered by the call from my ex-husband that pisses me off, or my kids come home and they've had a bad day and they need some support. But I've had a tough day and I'm tired and I don't have the ability to support you right now. And all of a sudden we're arguing. Like life is just happening, but it's what am I making that mean? Like I'm making it mean that I've had a hard day and I'm tired and who's supporting me and why am I the only one doing this? And I'm caught in the ego. Whereas if I center into myself, I can have more ability to recognize that that's just a story running in my head. And then I can show up for my kid in a very different way because I'm just showing up in a neutral territory. Same thing when the ex-husband calls and that's just his version. It has nothing to do with me. And I get to choose, do I believe and buy into the story? Or do I just breathe, center, and really allow something else, the truth of me, to be present in that situation? And I realize as I'm talking, this is kind of a nuance of intuition. It's not specifically right one of the clairs, but for me, there's a different way, there's different ways of experiencing what intuition is. And one of them is receiving information. For me, another way is really being present in my body to the truth that I'm a divine being. And that intuitive knowledge, living and being alive inside me, causes me to choose differently and flows out into my life differently. And for me, that is part of the intuitive journey. It just has a different nuance to it than what we were talking about before.
So what I'm hearing you say is intuition is trust. It's neutral. I mean, in my word, I would say it's it's non-attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the neutral word. How does it feel?
It feels like I'm going to be okay. Everything's okay.
Yeah. So like peaceful,
Mm-hmm.
relaxed.
Yeah. It's that. So it's like I've seen that as I've been more connection to my heart, to my intuition, to my soul, life outside of me is not necessarily getting easier. Like all the stuff is still happening. What's happening though is it's easier for me to be inside of all of that and still be able to find the joy and laugh at something and find that moment to be with my children in tenderness rather than in panic or upset. And that's what gets easier. It's easier to be me in my body. And then life can do whatever it's doing. But I'm choosing the quality of my being that's alive inside me.
Now, I love that you said that, as I'm thinking of a couple of people right now who, and I think this is where we lead into the next part of our conversation. I know people know that they're in touch with their intuition. And what you just shared, that's where the practice comes in. The practice of practicing not panicking when your kids have a bad day and you've had a bad day and you're tired, and just practicing it until there's less energy, less attachment, you're more neutral, more grounded in that experience. And so I'm just thinking of a couple of people right now who know that they're connected to their intuition, but maybe they just need the permission to know that, again, there's choice in it. Like there's still there's like this practice of being in it and recognizing that you're in it and that you're choosing to be in it. So you're choosing that joy and that peace rather than that panic. which again then sort of builds the muscle of intuition, which builds the muscle of trust. I feel like it kind of goes back and forth. And that helps us to live more in alignment with our personal truth. So I guess this word that's coming through with intuition is there's something about it that helps us align to our personal truth. So can you talk to me a little bit about how that showed up in your life, maybe how you support others in that, or how that comes through for you?
Yeah. As you're talking, right, the idea of as we develop and deepen our intuition, it's this sense that we are more than we've been taught we are. And I think as that knowledge grows, like as we sink deeper into these gifts and this opening and awareness inside us, something changes us. Like there's just our nervous system relaxes more and our breath becomes longer. Our ability to pause starts to exist. When I mean, gosh, years and years ago, I had this therapist and he's like, what happens in the moment when the thing happens and then you react? And I looked at him, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says it again. I'm like, what do you mean there's a space? I'm like, I don't know. And now it's like, I get it. I can create as much space as I want because I'm the one that's choosing. So I think that as we deepen into the gifts and the understanding that we are more than what we just are running around in our lives doing, that changes our ability to just be inside of our life. So that's a big part. And in sharing that, I've lost the thread of what your actual question was. But
It's aligning. Well, I think, no, I think you answered it. The question was, how is our intuition guiding us to live? I want to say the word soul alignment, but alignment with our truth. And your answer was because it's in the being, and that is the answer. That is
yeah.
living aligned with our truth. And what does it, how does, I want the listeners to understand that it takes practice, that that there's a willingness and a choice, and it takes practice. And on the other side of it, we realize we strengthen that muscle of trust. We realize that we are so much more than this physical body and that we're so connected. But the best part is, in my experience, and I'm curious if you have anything to add on this, is that it just feels more peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
It's really better for our physical health, our emotional and mental health. It's like there's less attachment, and it doesn't mean that we don't care. It just means that it just is, like, we don't even have to explain things anymore. And I think the feeling that comes up for me is peace, but also freedom. It's
Mm-hmm.
this freedom of what used to feel for me energetically like these like weighted strings, like almost like I'm walking in the mud, and it would feel so heavy. And I just don't have that anymore. And of course, it was the willingness to do a lot of inner work to recognize the awareness of, I am not my survivor stories. I am not the pain. I am not the dis-ease. I am not any of those things. I just am. And then from that place, that takes trust to know that, working that muscle of trust, leaning in and listening more, or leaning into what you're seeing or feeling or experiencing. And also giving permission to the listeners to know that you can ask. This is attachment and it is a little bit of ego, but sometimes it feels nice to have validation in the very beginning. You can ask, like, can I just, like, if my intuition is right, can you just like send me a signal? And yes, there's a little ego involved, but I'm just saying, like, it just sometimes in the beginning it feels really good. And then you get to a place where you just kind of laugh about it, because it's so actually normal that really most people are just missing it. It's like, right, all these signals and messages are happening right in front of our faces all day long, because that is actually reality, is because we are so connected that the ego is thinking that you're not connected to everything around you, and that all you got to do is just slow down and tune in a little bit and be in that flow of trust and truth, and allow yourself to be guided. And I'm just curious, as we bring this to a closure, what would you say to a person who's just learning about this, or wanting to know more about how they're how to live an intuitively guided life, or how to develop that intuitive wisdom within them?
Yeah, I think a big part, you were touching on it with this reality, right? Like the signs are all around us, but it's whether we're able to see them or not. And it really speaks to how our reality is made up of what we believe. So if we
Mhm.
believe that we're not intuitive, and we believe we can't remember our dreams, and we believe that we're alone and there's no signs, then guess what? That will be your experience. But if you really lean into the possibility that just maybe life isn't exactly what I think it is, it opens something. It allows your brain to perceive something that it was close to previously. And all of a sudden, you might see that feather on the ground every day for a week. And you might begin to wonder, like, I think that's not a coincidence anymore. Whereas before, you would have just walked right by it, wouldn't have even noticed it. But you're open to signs. So, you know what? That butterfly, that dragonfly, it's going to come and bring you a message because you are open to receiving more. I think that's a big part of it, right? We're closed to receiving in so many areas of our lives. And it's when we start to
Mm.
allow ourselves to be open and to start receiving that we begin to see that there's a lot that we were missing.
Yes. And so, to recap some of the qualities of intuition that I heard you share today, that I thought was just so fun to just take in from this conversation. Intuition is trust, it's neutral, it's peace or peaceful, and it's curious. Like, it's just being open to possibility, and just being open to then receiving. And what is so interesting, I shared with you, I just published my prosperity journal. When I talk about prosperity consciousness, like the frequency of prosperity consciousness, which is it is embodied trust. It is about receiving. Like, it has a lot of the same qualities as intuition does. And then I just got this image of the sacral chakra, which is the place of, which is also probably where that came through for me, because that's where clairsentience comes through, and that's where creativity is, and also abundance and prosperity. So I'm literally processing this right now live, but it's just so, like, it can be a really fun place to be too. It can be really fun, and it doesn't have to be scary, and it's not this, like, voodoo black magic thing, and it's not this, it's actually very natural. It's part of who we are. There's even an Albert Einstein quote, and it's totally not in my mind right now, but I just remember being a former engineer myself, like being like, yeah, see, like, it's science and spirit and energy. It's all the things. And so my hope today for the listeners, my intention is to give you permission and space to be more curious, to tap into your own intuition, to really understand how it's coming through for you, to learn to lean into that trust. And Sarah, tell us a little bit more about how people can, well, first of all, your podcast is a great place to start. Tell us more about your podcast, the ways that you support people, how you work, so anybody who's interested can find out more.
Yeah, thanks. I host the Modern Day Intuitive podcast, which is it's a little bit different. I do an intuitive reading for the guest, and the prayer intention of the podcast is that we see ourselves in each other. I am reading for someone for a question or a challenge, but we all share similar things, and I really love that the listeners feel that I'm talking directly to them, even though it's someone else's reading. And then the other part is to really inspire people to follow their own intuition. Like they see it live in action, what it looks like when I'm receiving intuitive information for someone and how it can be so life changing. So
Mm,
I really love that idea of inspiring through that. I offer a variety of programs where I teach spirituality, developing intuition, really being on that journey of our self exploration. I love to bring in lots of magic, ceremony, ritual, because they're all so delicious and dear to my heart. And I do have a free gift that's called Ignite Your Intuition that I can send a link for. Also, the quiz, if you're interested in learning what is your primal intuitive power, that's available as well. So, lots of great stuff. I really just love mentoring and inspiring others to really follow their own path, their own
mm,
heart.
mm. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. And yes, we will 100% share the links for the quiz and the Ignite Your Intuition. I think that will be much appreciated and loved by listeners. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been really, really enjoyable. I've enjoyed our time.
Awesome. And thank you so much to everybody listening in again for another week. And we'll see you again on the show next week.